The desert evening was slowly settling over the land, painting the sky with long strokes of orange and soft purple. Luke Harmon, a quiet cowboy with a reputation for fairness and calmness, rode his horse along the dusty trail that curved between low hills. He had been out since early morning looking for a stray calf, and now he was heading home with nothing but the sound of the wind and the soft steps of his horse to keep him company. He liked the quiet. It made him feel steady inside, but the quiet broke when he noticed something unusual ahead, an odd shape lying near a dry creek bed. At first he thought it might be an abandoned crate, or maybe an old wagon part left behind by a traveling group. Things like that were common on lonely trails. But as he rode closer, he saw it was a wooden handcart. It looked heavy, built from simple planks, the type used to carry supplies when people traveled on foot. Luke slowed his horse. Something about the way the handcart sat unevenly on the dirt made him look again. It wasn't just abandoned, it looked like it had been left in a hurry. He stepped down from his horse and walked toward it. As he got closer, his boots crunching softly on the dry ground, he froze. A young Apache woman lay on the handcart, her body still, her eyes half open but full of exhaustion. Her dark hair fell across her face, sticking to her skin from heat and dust. A thin blanket had been placed over her, but it looked too small to protect her from the harsh sun she must have faced earlier. For a long moment he didn't move. He just took in the sight of her, shocked that anyone would leave a person out here, so helpless and alone. Then he crouched down gently, not wanting to startle her. She turned her eyes toward him with effort. Fear flickered there, mixed with shame as if she expected him to turn away. Her lips parted just slightly. "Please. Water," she whispered, her voice weak and breathless. Luke immediately reached for his canteen. He lifted her head carefully with one hand, surprised by how light she felt. She drank slowly, as if each sip took all the energy she had left. When she finished, she let out a shaky breath and closed her eyes, but didn't faint. She was still aware of him. Luke looked at her legs. They were stretched out and stiff, and he noticed she hadn't moved them at all. He gently touched her blanket-covered knee to see if she reacted, but she didn't. A heavy feeling settled in his chest. She wasn't just tired, she couldn't move her lower body. "Can you hear me well?" he asked quietly. She nodded a little, though the movement looked painful. "What happened to you?" he asked, keeping his tone soft. She struggled for a moment before whispering, "My name, Nita." Her voice was fragile, like a candle struggling against the wind. Luke leaned closer so she wouldn't have to speak loudly. She explained slowly, stopping for breaths between words, that she had been traveling with her group when an accident injured her back. She lost the feeling in her legs. The journey had become too hard, and her people didn't have what they needed to care for her. They believed she would slow them down, maybe even cost them days of travel. So they left her with water and the handcart, thinking it was the only thing they could do. Luke listened without interrupting. Each word she spoke felt heavy. She didn't sound angry at her people, just hurt and tired, as if she had accepted their decision long before. She looked at him again, and for a second he saw something deeper in her eyes. The quiet expectation that he, too, would leave soon. She had seen people walk away before, and she believed this moment would be no different. Luke sat back on his heels, his thoughts turning over and over. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't family. He didn't know anything about Apache customs or how her people made decisions, but he did know this. Leaving her behind wasn't something he could do. The idea of walking away made his heart feel tight, like something inside him refused to allow such a choice. "You're not alone now," he said finally. "I'm not leaving you here." For a moment Nita didn't react. She simply stared at him as if trying to understand what he meant. When she finally did realize he was serious, her eyes softened in disbelief. "People promise," she whispered, "but then they go." "I'm not going," he said simply. He reached out and checked the handcart. It was old, the wheels squeaking when touched. There were signs that someone had tried to drag it before giving up. Her skin was warm from too much sun exposure, and he guessed she had been lying there for many hours, maybe since the previous day. No one should suffer like that. "I'm going to get you out of here," he told her firmly. Nita didn't fight him. She didn't have the strength. Instead, she closed her eyes as if surrendering to whatever fate chose next. Luke lifted her carefully in his arms. She gasped from the sudden movement but didn't complain. He moved slowly, supporting her back with steady hands. She felt so fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. His horse stood quietly as he approached, trained to remain calm even in unusual situations. Luke placed blankets across the saddle, creating a soft base. Then he set Nita down gently, tying support ropes so she wouldn't fall. Her breathing was shallow from the effort, but she didn't protest. For the first time, he saw a hint of trust in her expression. Once she was secure, Luke took the handcart and turned it over. Something told him it didn't deserve to stay abandoned in the dirt. Even if it couldn't be used now, he wanted to return it someday to her people. Maybe it would help them understand she didn't vanish into the desert. He tied the handcart to the back of his saddle. Then he took the reins and began the slow ride toward his cabin. It was miles away, and he had to be careful. He rode with one hand while the other held Nita gently to keep her stable. The trail was uneven, and every dip made her wince, but he spoke to her softly each time, reassuring her that she was safe, that he was watching every step. As the sky darkened, stars began to appear, one by one. Nita stared upward at them, her expression changing from fear to something calmer. She seemed surprised by the idea that someone, a stranger, no less, had chosen to stay. Halfway through the journey, she spoke again, her voice thin but sincere. "You don't know me. Why help?" Luke didn't hesitate. "Because you're alive. That's enough." She let out a soft breath, almost like a quiet cry, but not from pain, from relief. When they finally reached his cabin, the night had settled completely. A small lantern hung outside his door, swinging gently in the breeze. He dismounted, lifted her into his arms again, and carried her inside. His cabin was small but warm wooden walls, a tidy table, a bed pushed against the corner. A fire was already waiting in the hearth from earlier that morning. He set her down carefully on the bed, using extra blankets as cushions behind her back. She watched every move he made with disbelief. "You can rest here," he told her, pulling another blanket over her. "No one is leaving you alone again." Her eyes shimmered with quiet tears. She tried to speak but couldn't find the words. Instead, she simply nodded, as if accepting a kindness she never expected. That night, Nita didn't cry from fear or abandonment. She cried because, for the first time since her accident, someone chose her life over convenience. Someone had stayed. Someone had refused to walk away. And in that small cabin, surrounded by silence and soft firelight, a story began that would change both of their lives. The morning came slowly, with pale sunlight slipping through the cabin window and warming the wooden walls. Luke had barely slept. He had spent most of the night checking on Nita, making sure she had water, making sure she could breathe comfortably, and adjusting her blankets whenever she shifted in pain. She slept lightly, waking often, though she never complained. Each time she opened her eyes, she looked confused at first, as if expecting the desert sky and empty silence she had become used to. And every time she saw the cabin roof instead, she seemed surprised. When she woke for the last time, the sun was already rising. Luke was by the stove, stirring a small pot of warm broth. His movements were quiet and careful, as if he didn't want to disturb the peaceful air inside the cabin. He glanced over at her and saw her eyes open again, watching him silently. "You're awake," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" Nita swallowed hard before answering. "I'm still here." "You are," he replied. She didn't smile, but a tiny bit of calm passed through her expression, like a soft breath of relief. Luke lifted the pot and poured a little broth into a cup. He walked to her bedside and helped her sit up by adjusting the pillows behind her. She winced from the movement, but she didn't protest. He held the cup for her since her hands trembled too much to hold it herself. She sipped slowly, grateful for the warmth. "You don't owe me," she murmured between small sips, as if the idea of being a burden still weighed heavily on her mind. "I know," Luke replied gently. I'm helping because I want to. She looked away, her eyes filling with uncertainty. She didn't understand why someone would make that choice for her. Luke set the cup aside once she finished. Then he knelt beside her, checking the blanket around her legs. Do you feel anything here? He asked as he touched her knee lightly. No, she whispered. He moved his hand lower, near her shin. Here? No. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes did. Losing the ability to move her legs hadn't just changed her body, it had taken away her place in the world she belonged to. Luke could see it. She felt disconnected, as if each day she expected to fade further away from the life she once had. Luke didn't push her to talk about it. Instead, he brought her more water and helped her lie back down comfortably. Then he stepped outside to bring in fresh firewood. Even from the yard, he could hear the faint crackle of the fire inside and the quiet hum of morning insects waking up. When he returned to the cabin, Nita was awake again, watching the door as if worried he wouldn't come back. When she saw him, she looked down quickly, embarrassed that she cared so much about the presence of a stranger. But Luke noticed anyway. You're not alone, he reminded her gently. She nodded without looking up. The day moved slowly. Luke cleaned her arms and face with warm water, careful not to startle her. She watched him with confused eyes, always expecting him to pull away or lose patience. Every moment he stayed, every small task he handled for her, made her feel something she hadn't felt in many days, the chance to breathe without fear. During the afternoon, she gathered enough strength to tell him more about what had happened. She explained that her injury came from a rock slide that struck her group while they were passing near a canyon. She had been pinned beneath the stones until her people pulled her out. At first they cared for her, but when days passed and she still couldn't walk, fear and pressure grew. They didn't know how to move her safely, and they worried about slowing down the journey. Supplies were running low. They made a difficult decision that hurt her deeply, one that she didn't speak of with anger, only sadness. Luke listened to every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He just let her speak until her voice grew tired. You must rest, he said gently. Nita shook her head slightly. If I sleep, I fear waking alone. You won't, he promised. She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth inside him. She found no doubt there. Luke had no intention of leaving her alone. Not now, and not later. As the sun reached its highest point, he helped her sit near the window so she could feel the warm light on her skin. He placed a chair beside her bed and sat with her, talking lightly about the things around the cabin, the land, his horse, the stray calf he was searching for, the plants that grew in the nearby hills. He kept his words simple and calm, hoping to distract her from the heaviness inside her heart. You speak softly, she said at one point, almost surprised. Most days don't need shouting, Luke replied with a small smile. She lowered her eyes, quietly accepting the calmness he offered. In the late afternoon, Luke stepped outside to gather herbs. The air was warm, and cicadas buzzed lazily in the distance. He found a few plants he knew could help reduce pain. Though he wasn't trained in medicine, he carried them inside, crushed them into a warm mixture, and gently placed them on her lower back. Nita closed her eyes, letting the warmth sink into her body. You're kind, she whispered without opening her eyes. Anyone should be, he said. No, she replied softly. Not everyone is. Her voice carried the weight of being abandoned, of seeing people she loved forced to make a choice she didn't understand. Luke sensed the ache behind her words, a quiet longing for someone to believe her life still had value. You deserve care, he told her gently. Your life isn't over. For the first time, her breath trembled, not from pain but from the sharp, unexpected hope his words gave her. Evening came again, and Luke prepared simple food from what little he had. He wasn't a skilled cook, but he tried to make everything warm and easy for her to eat. She took each spoonful carefully, leaning against the pillows while he held the bowl. You should rest too, she said softly. I will, after you're settled. You already did much. It's not too much, he replied. She watched him quietly after that, her eyes softer now, no longer filled with fear but with something new, maybe respect, maybe gratitude, maybe something she couldn't name yet. Night fell slowly, and the cabin filled with the comforting glow of lamplight. Luke sat nearby, while Nita drifted in and out of sleep. Several times she whispered uncertain questions, small and fragile like a child afraid of the dark. Each time, Luke answered calmly, reassuring her that he was still there. "Why do you stay?" she asked once more, her voice barely a breath. Luke looked at her, his expression steady. "Because you matter." She blinked slowly, overwhelmed by the simplicity and power of those words. In her world, responsibility often mattered more than kindness. But here, inside this small cabin with its warm fire and soft lamplight, kindness was the only thing guiding him. Before she finally fell asleep for the night, Nita opened her eyes one last time and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Luke didn't speak. He simply reached over and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders, making sure she was comfortable. Then he sat quietly, listening to her breathing grow steady. The desert outside was silent, but inside the cabin, a fragile sense of peace settled around them. In just one day, Nita had gone from being left alone under the unforgiving heat to being cared for in a safe place by a person who refused to treat her as a burden. And as sleep claimed her at last, one thought stayed in her mind, a thought she hadn't dared believe before. She wasn't alone anymore. The next days passed slowly, with each sunrise bringing a soft, steady routine that shaped the quiet life inside Luke's small cabin. The desert outside was wide, harsh, and unpredictable. But the world inside those four wooden walls felt calm and safe. Luke made sure of that. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, he would check on Nita, adjust her pillows, and offer her water. She always woke gently, her eyes opening with a mixture of confusion and calmness, still surprised that she was indoors, still alive, and still not alone. Luke prepared simple meals, warm porridge, soft vegetables, and small pieces of fruit he had saved. He always made sure the food was easy for her to eat, and he fed her patiently when her arms were too weak to lift the spoon herself. She apologized often, whispering that he shouldn't have to do all this. But Luke always answered the same way. "You're healing. That's all that matters." Nita slowly began to trust his steady presence. She watched him move around the cabin, fixing things, sweeping the floor, tending the fire, talking to his horse outside. He was always nearby, always listening carefully whenever she spoke, always giving her time to rest when her strength faded. She had lived through fear and abandonment. But here she found something she didn't expect. A place where someone cared without asking anything in return. One afternoon, Nita gathered the courage to ask him something. Her voice trembled slightly as she said his name. "Luke, may I ask you something?" He pulled a chair beside her bed and sat. "Of course. Why do you help me so much? You owe me nothing." Luke leaned back, his expression gentle. "I don't need a reason to help someone who needs help, but my people left me," she whispered, the memory still sharp. "If they thought I slowed them down, why didn't you?" Luke shook his head. "You're not something to throw away just because times get hard. Your life is worth more than convenience." Nita lowered her eyes, unable to hold his gaze. No one had spoken to her that way since her accident. The weight of his kindness made her chest tighten. Not from pain, but from an emotion she couldn't name. On the third morning after her rescue, Luke tried to help her sit up more fully. Her back was stiff, and she winced quietly, but she didn't complain. Once she was supported by pillows, he began checking if her legs responded to any movement. He pressed lightly near her knees, then her calves, then her ankles. "Tell me if you feel anything," he said. She didn't. She watched his face instead, searching for disappointment, frustration, or regret. But he showed none of that. He simply nodded and said, "We keep trying." His steady patience gave her strength she didn't know she still had. Later that day, she told him more about her life before the accident. She spoke about her childhood, about the river she loved, about the stories her grandmother used to tell, about the nights when the tribe gathered around a fire and sang. Her voice grew warmer with each memory, and Luke listened carefully, absorbing every detail. He had grown up alone on his family ranch, with only his father for company, until he passed away. Hearing about a life full of voices, traditions, and community felt both foreign and comforting to him. While Nita talked, Luke repaired the wooden handcart he had brought back. He smoothed the rough edges, tightened the loose nails, and replaced the broken wheel with a spare he found in his shed. Nita watched curiously. "Why fix it?" she asked softly. Luke paused, wiping dust from his hands. "Because it belongs to you. And someday, when you're ready, maybe you'll want it returned to your people. It can help send a message that you survived." Nita's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't thought about returning to her tribe. The idea terrified her. She knew they had left her, believing she couldn't survive the long journey. But a part of her still longed for the faces she knew, the sounds of her home, the smell of the campfires. "What if they don't want me back?" she whispered. Luke sat beside her again. "People make mistakes when they're scared," he said gently. "Fear doesn't mean they stopped caring." She turned her head away, trying to hide the tears forming in her eyes. She didn't want to be weak in front of him, but Luke pretended not to notice, giving her the privacy she needed while staying close enough for her to feel safe. Evenings in the cabin became the quietest but most meaningful times. Luke would sit in the chair by her bed, whittling pieces of wood or mending his gear, while she watched the fire dance in the hearth. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she simply rested in silence. Each moment held a sense of peace they both appreciated. A few evenings later, she was strong enough to sit outside the cabin for a short time. Luke carried her carefully in his arms and placed her in a chair he built himself. The fresh air touched her face, and for the first time since the accident, she felt the breeze move through her hair. The sky stretched endlessly above them, and distant birds circled lazily in the warm light. "It feels like a dream," she said quietly. "It's real," Luke replied, standing beside her and looking at the horizon. "Why does the world feel so big?" she whispered. "Because you've been through something hard," he answered. "But you're still here." She took in a shaky breath, feeling both small and strong at the same time. One day, while Luke was boiling water for herbs, Nita asked him another question, one she had been holding inside for a long time. "Luke, do you think I will ever walk again?" His expression softened. He set the pot aside, walked to her, and sat down so their eyes were level. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I do know one thing. You're more than your legs. Even if you don't walk again, it doesn't take away your spirit, who you are, or how much you matter." She stared at him, stunned by his honesty and kindness. Everyone else in her life had avoided the truth, had spoken in soft apologies or hurried worries. But Luke spoke to her with clarity and respect. "You see me as more than a burden," she whispered. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're a person with worth." Tears formed in her eyes again, but this time she didn't look away. She let them fall silently, because something inside her finally felt allowed to break open fear, guilt, loneliness. Luke stayed beside her, saying nothing, letting her release everything she had been holding inside. Over the next days, she continued telling him pieces of her story about her family, her brother, her dreams before the accident. Luke shared parts of his life too, his ranching days, his loneliness after his father passed, the way he found peace in helping others. They learned about each other slowly, gently, without pressure. Their connection grew naturally, built on kindness, quiet conversations, and the understanding that both of them carried scars, even if only one set could be seen. On the 5th day, when Luke checked her legs again, he asked, "Tell me if you sense anything at all." She paused, waiting for disappointment, but suddenly, something changed. As his hand pressed lightly near her ankle, she felt the tiniest spark, barely a whisper of sensation. Not quite movement, but a faint awareness. I felt something," she said softly, almost afraid to believe it. Luke's eyes widened just a little. "Tell me again." "Here?" "Yes," she whispered. "It's small, but it's something." He smiled, not in excitement, but in gentle encouragement. "That's good. Very good." Nita felt her heart beat faster. A spark of hope she hadn't felt since before the accident. Even if the sensation was tiny, it was real, and Luke didn't let her get carried away with unrealistic dreams. But he celebrated the moment with her just enough to give her courage. That night, she rested with a new sense of possibility. Her legs were still weak, still quiet, still far from normal, but something inside her had changed. She no longer felt like a ghost, waiting to be forgotten. She felt alive again. Luke watched her fall asleep with calmness settling over her features, and he thought to himself how much strength she carried in her heart, even when she didn't see it. They both knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But now, for the first time, Nita felt she might have a future. And she wasn't facing it alone. And in the stillness of that cabin, with the fire glowing warmly, a silent promise grew between them. One rooted not in words, but in actions, patience, and the simple act of staying. The sixth morning in Luke's cabin began quietly, like the others before it. The sky was pale, the air cool, and the small fire in the hearth crackled softly, while Luke prepared warm tea for Nita. She was stronger now, still unable to move her legs, but her upper body had regained some strength. Her voice was steadier, and her eyes didn't hold the same fear they once did. Luke took that as a good sign. He liked seeing her sit a little taller each day, and he made sure she always felt safe. But that morning, something different hung in the air, something Luke couldn't name at first. A kind of heaviness, a stillness. He felt it when he stepped outside to check on his horse. The breeze was softer than usual, almost cautious. Even the animals seemed quiet. He told himself it was nothing, but his instincts whispered otherwise. Inside the cabin, Nita sensed his uneasiness. She watched him move around with a thoughtful expression. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently. He paused at the table, thinking. "Not wrong," he answered. "Just different." She nodded slowly. She trusted his instincts. He lived close to the land, understood the changes in the air, the silence of birds, the movement of dust. His concern made her nervous, even if she didn't show it. The morning passed peacefully. Luke helped her sit outside again for a short time. The fresh air always lifted her spirits. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of the sun settle on her skin. Luke stood beside her, leaning on the railing of the porch, watching the open land stretch endlessly in every direction. After a long, quiet moment, Nita spoke softly. "Do you think my people ever wondered what happened to me?" Luke took a breath. "I think people carry guilt longer than they admit." "You think they miss me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I think someone must. A family doesn't forget that quickly." Nita lowered her gaze. "I want to believe that." "You should," Luke said. But even as he comforted her, he felt that strange heaviness again. It drifted around the edges of the quiet day like a shadow. Something was coming, he didn't know what. But he felt it. Later in the afternoon, Luke stepped inside to prepare herbs, leaving Nita on the porch where she could watch the horizon. She didn't expect to see anything unusual. Her gaze drifted peacefully across the open land until something caught her attention, something far away, almost too small to notice. A faint line of dust, rising, moving, coming closer. Her breath tightened. She recognized the shape immediately. That pattern of dust could only mean one thing. Riders. Many riders. They moved with a certain confidence, a way of riding she had known since childhood. Her tribe. She stared, frozen between fear and hope. Her hands trembled on the arms of the wooden chair. She wanted to call for Luke, but her voice caught in her throat. A dozen feelings collided inside her: relief, confusion, longing, and a deep fear that she wasn't ready to face them. Luke walked out a moment later, wiping his hands on a cloth. He saw her expression and stopped instantly. "Nita? What's wrong?" She raised her hand weakly, pointing toward the horizon. Luke followed the direction of her trembling finger. The dust cloud was closer now, much closer. He felt his stomach tighten. He wasn't afraid of people, but he knew these riders weren't coming for him. They were coming for her. Whether that was good or bad, he didn't know. How many? He asked quietly. She swallowed. 10. Maybe more. He nodded slowly. Stay calm. I am trying, she whispered. Luke gently lifted her from the porch chair and carried her inside the cabin. He set her on the bed carefully. She clutched the blanket with shaking hands. They are my people, she whispered. But I do not know if they want to see me. I do not know what they will say. Luke kneeled beside her. Listen to me. Whatever happens, you're safe here. They won't harm you, and I won't let you be taken somewhere you don't want to go. Her eyes softened at his words, and the fear in her chest loosened slightly. She nodded, trusting him completely. By the time the riders reached the cabin yard, the sound of their horses filled the air, hooves striking the earth, leather creaking, the snorts of strong animals. Luke stepped outside, leaving the door slightly open behind him so Nita could hear everything but stay hidden if she wished. The Apache riders slowed to a halt in front of the cabin. 10 of them. They sat tall on their horses, strong and proud, yet their faces showed something unexpected: concern. The man at the front, clearly the chief, studied Luke with steady eyes. He spoke calmly, with the weight of responsibility in his voice. We come searching, the chief said. We seek a woman named Nita. Luke met his gaze without fear. She's inside, he replied. A ripple of relief moved through the riders. Nita's older brother, a tall man with sharp features, dismounted immediately. His expression held guilt, worry, and something close to desperation. She lives? He asked, his voice tight. She does, Luke answered. The brother took a shaky breath. We made a mistake, he said, almost to himself. We should not have left her. Luke stepped aside and motioned toward the cabin door. The brother rushed forward, pushing it open. When he saw Nita lying on the bed, tears filled his eyes instantly. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he touched her arm gently. Nita, he whispered, his voice breaking. Sister, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Nita stared at him, her own eyes shining with a mix of shock and relief. For days she had feared this moment, feared they would reject her, or worse, not come at all. But here he was, crying for her, apologizing, holding her hand like he had never let it go. Behind him, the other riders entered quietly. Each lowered their heads in respect, offering gentle words of regret. They had not forgotten her. They had not moved on without thinking of her. They had returned to find her, even if it had taken time for their fear and confusion to fade. The chief approached Luke outside the cabin, placing a hand on his shoulder. You protected her, he said. You saved her life. For that, our gratitude is deep. Luke nodded modestly. She needed help. You gave more than help, the chief said. You gave kindness. You gave patience. You gave her a chance to breathe again. Inside the cabin, Nita held her brother's hand, as if afraid he might disappear if she blinked. He told her how the tribe argued for days about their mistake, how guilt hung over every evening fire, how her mother cried, believing she would never see her again. They had returned the moment they gathered enough supplies and courage to face their own shame. I thought you didn't want me, she whispered. Her brother shook his head fiercely. We were wrong. We were afraid. But we never stopped loving you. Nita's tears flowed freely. She wasn't angry anymore. She was simply overwhelmed by the knowledge that she mattered, that her absence had left an empty place in the hearts of her people. When she looked toward the cabin door and saw Luke standing outside with the chief, her heart softened even more. Without him, none of this would have happened. Without his kindness, she might have never seen her family again. The chief entered the cabin and bowed his head slightly to Nita. You are strong, he said gently. You survived the desert. You found a protector when we failed to be one. Nita looked at Luke with quiet gratitude, her voice barely above a whisper. He saved me. The room fell quiet with her words. Luke did not smile, but his eyes held warmth. He knew this moment belonged to her, not him. The chief turned to Luke again. You will always be welcomed by our people, he said. Our doors, our fires, Our hearts, they will be open to you. Luke nodded respectfully. The riders gathered outside, preparing to take Nita home. Her brother lifted her gently from the bed, carrying her out into the sunlight. She hesitated for a moment, looking back at the cabin, at the place that had saved her, at the man who refused to leave her behind, and with that one look, she silently promised she would return. The tribe mounted their horses, forming a careful line around her. They left slowly, allowing her to keep her eyes on Luke's cabin until the desert trail finally carried her away. Luke stood on the porch long after they were gone, the warm breeze touching his face. The cabin felt quieter than before, almost too quiet. But he knew he had done the right thing. Nita was safe. Nita was home, and her journey was far from over. The cabin was quiet after Nita and her people rode away. Luke stood on the porch until the dust cloud faded into the distance, and only the open desert remained. The air felt heavier somehow, as if the silence had weight. He slowly stepped back inside the cabin, and the empty bed struck him harder than he expected. For days, he had grown used to her soft breathing, her gentle voice, the way she looked at everything with cautious hope. Now, the room felt too still. Luke took a slow breath and reminded himself that she was safe. She was with her family, where she belonged. That should have made him feel complete. But instead, a quiet ache settled in his chest, something he couldn't name yet. He walked around the cabin, picking up blankets, fixing the pillows, and tidying the small messes left behind. Each thing he touched held a memory of her presence, her small smiles, her gratitude, her growing strength. He didn't realize how much life she had brought into this little wooden home until it was gone. For the first time in nearly a week, the cabin felt truly empty. He spent the next days returning to his old routine. He checked on the cattle, repaired fences, and rode the far edges of his land. But nothing felt the same. Every time he passed the creek bed, he remembered the moment he had found her lying helpless on the handcart. Every time he returned to the cabin, he remembered carrying her inside, whispering to her that she wasn't alone. Her presence had changed more than his days. It had changed the quiet space in his heart he had long ago accepted as permanent. Late one afternoon, a small bird landed on his porch railing. It chirped once, sharply, almost urgently. Luke looked at it curiously. For some reason, the little creature made him smile. The world still had surprises left. Maybe his life did too. A week passed. Then another. Luke told himself Nita was probably healing, reconnecting with her people, adjusting to her new life. He hoped her legs would regain more feeling. He hoped she was warm at night, surrounded by family instead of fear. He hoped she smiled again. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Luke stood outside, splitting wood. His arms were tired, his shirt damp with sweat, and his mind deep in thought. Suddenly, the ground vibrated faintly. His horse lifted its head. Luke stopped mid-swing and listened. Hoofbeats, more than one. He slowly set the axe aside and wiped his forehead. Riders came this way sometimes. But something felt familiar about this sound. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Measured. Intentional. The hoofbeats grew closer until shapes appeared on the horizon. 6 riders. Apache riders. They moved in a calm formation, respectful, not threatening. Luke's heart lifted unexpectedly, though he tried not to hope too quickly. When they reached his yard, their leader raised a hand in greeting. Luke stepped forward, his expression steady but curious. The riders smiled politely, then parted their lines slightly, revealing someone riding in the center. Nita. She sat in a specially crafted padded seat attached securely to the horse, her posture straight, and her eyes bright with life. She looked stronger, healthier, and somehow more confident than when she left. Luke felt his breath leave him in a quiet rush. Nita's eyes met his instantly, and something warm passed between them, something quiet but powerful. Her brother dismounted first. "We come with peace," he said calmly, "and with gratitude." Luke nodded. "You're welcome here." Nita's brother stepped aside, allowing Luke to approach her. Luke walked slowly, unsure if he should speak first, unsure what words could capture the sudden flood of relief inside him. Nita smiled gently, the soft smile he remembered well. "I said I would return," she said. Luke felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'm glad you did." Her brother explained that Nita had asked to visit the man who saved her life. The tribe believed it was right to honor him properly, so they brought her themselves. They wanted Luke to know that their people remembered kindness for generations. Nita was helped gently down from her horse and into a wooden chair they carried for her comfort. She sat beneath the shade of a tree near Luke's cabin, breathing deeply as if the familiar air calmed her soul. Luke stood beside her. "How have you been?" he asked softly. "Better," she said. "My people take care of me. They built things to help me. They talk to me like I matter." Her voice softened. "But I wanted to see you. You were the one who gave me a chance to live long enough to feel all this." Luke lowered his eyes for a moment, touched more deeply than he could express. "I'm just glad you're healing." Nita's hand moved slightly, not fully, but enough for him to see her strength growing. "Luke," she said gently, "my legs still do not move much. Maybe they never will. But I am not lost anymore. Because someone believed I was worth saving." Her words settled between them like a quiet blessing. The Apache riders gave Luke gifts as thanks: beautifully crafted blankets, woven baskets, and dried herbs known to their people. They placed each item slowly and respectfully, honoring him with every gesture. Luke felt humbled. He had never imagined helping one woman would bring so much gratitude. When the gifts were presented, the chief spoke again. "You have a place among us," he said. "Whenever you come, our camp will welcome you." Luke nodded, grateful but unsure how to express the emotions filling him. After the formalities, the riders stepped back to give Luke and Nita privacy. They talked for a long time about her journey home, the welcomes she received, the tears her family shed when they realized how much she had suffered. She told Luke that her mother cried for hours the night she returned. Her brother stayed beside her every day, refusing to let her feel neglected again. But as she spoke, her eyes drifted toward the cabin again and again, the cabin where she had been saved, protected, and believed in. Luke looked at her gently. "Do you miss it here?" She nodded slowly. "I miss the quiet. I miss the warmth. I miss you." His heart thumped harder, but he said nothing at first. He didn't want to say something foolish in front of her tribe. Instead, he kneeled beside her chair and spoke quietly. "You helped me too," he said. "More than you know." She looked surprised. "How?" "You reminded me that caring for someone still matters," he said. "You showed me that even lonely places can feel alive again." Nita's breath trembled, but her smile grew. The riders watched from a respectful distance, quietly pleased by the connection they saw forming. As the sun slipped lower, Nita's brother approached gently. "We should return before night." Nita nodded but looked back at Luke with a hopeful expression. "May I visit again?" Luke smiled softly. "Anytime." With help from her brother, she was lifted back onto her horse. Before leaving, she reached out, touching Luke's hand lightly. "You saved more than my life," she whispered. "You saved my hope." Luke's eyes softened. "And you brought life back to this cabin." Her smile lingered as the riders began to move. They left at a slow pace, allowing her to look back again and again until distance blurred the world around her. Luke stood on the porch long after they disappeared. This time, the silence felt different, not empty, not lonely, but peaceful. He knew she would return. He knew their paths were forever connected. For in saving her, he had unknowingly changed his own life as well. And somewhere across the desert, Nita carried a piece of his kindness with her, knowing she had found not only safety, but a lasting bond that distance could not break.